Well, welcome to Plato's Pod, where we engage in a group discussion on selections from the complete works of Plato, the philosopher and geometer who wrote nearly 2,400 years ago. Today is January 9, 2022, and I'm your host, James Myers. It is an honor to be joined in dialogue by participants from the Toronto Philosophy and Calgary Philosophy Meetup groups. Whether you've been with us before or are here for the first time, whether you have experience with or are new to Plato's works, I encourage you to add your voice to our dialogue. So having finished 6 episodes on the Republic before the holiday break, today we will explore the first part of Philebus, up to Stephanus reference 34c. Here we will find several themes that connect Philebus to the Republic, including the distinction between unlimited being and the limits of becoming, the good, and the nature of the soul. In our next meeting in 2 weeks, we will begin to look at Plato's Phaedo. As always, to focus our discussion, I have suggested 3 themes, which are posted on the shared drive linked to the event notice on meetup.com. We'll invite participants to exchange their thoughts on today's reading, and as they do so, I will briefly summarize and try to connect different perspectives to a common thread of ideas. We can go in any direction the group chooses, but for everyone's benefit, please relate your comments and opinions to Plato's text. To contribute your thoughts, please use the raise hands feature in Zoom. Using the first name from your screen profile, I will call on you to speak in the order that hands are raised, giving precedence to those who haven't spoken before. After we finish recording in 2 hours, I welcome any participants who wish to remain online for Plato's Cafe, a casual half-hour discussion on Plato or philosophy in general. Today's reading of Philebus begins with a discussion between Socrates and Protarchus on the question of whether all human souls find happiness and the good in a state of pleasure or in a state of knowledge. Protarchus argues for pleasure, while, not surprisingly, Socrates advocates for knowledge. Although they observe that while pleasure and knowledge are each one thing, both manifest in many ways, good and bad. After they put the life of pleasure and the life of knowledge on trial, Socrates concludes that the best life arises in a mixture of both pleasure and knowledge. The challenge is then to find the appropriate ratio of each in the combination of the two. The problem is particularly daunting because the pleasure component has no limits of either good or evil, while the knowledge part of the mixture is necessarily limited, and because everything has a cause, which could be either pleasure or knowledge or both. So in sorting out the mixing of unlimited and limited, we see the knowledge of number and calculation put into practice in Philebus. Recall that Socrates said in the Republic that number and calculation are a philosopher's first order of knowledge because they allow the application of reason. It's with our faculty of reason that we receive empirical data from the 5 physical senses and combine these inputs into meaning based on first principles. In seeking the first principle from among the many particulars of either a limited or unlimited thing, Socrates cautions Protarchus. He warns not to look to the thing's greatest extent for the first principle, because greatest is a certainty that applies only when there is a limit. But when we are dealing with the unlimited, there is no absolute greatest. And so instead, we must look for more and less and other terms of relativity and ratio. Then we can find among the uncertainties the one common denominator or form of the thing's many characteristics, but only if we know, quote, the exact number of every plurality that lies between the unlimited and the one, says Socrates. Socrates emphasizes the importance of understanding the order of empirical data to know their position in sequences of events and patterns, so that we can apply a rational approach to derive meaning. The key to determine order correctly, he says, is to appreciate the intermediates that exist between the unlimited and the limited. We'll conclude today's reading with the different and necessary roles that both memory and recollection play in our ability to reason on the basis of the order of things. So let's start today's discussion by considering the relevance, if any, of the difference between the one and the many, or the same and the different, to our lives now in 2022. Socrates provides a few examples of the logic that may still resonate, but I'll put the question out to the group first. In your daily living, is distinguishing between the one and the many important, and why or why not? And so I'll put that question out there for anyone who would like to take that up. There's some examples that I think, as I mentioned, that Socrates provides, but can we think of any modern, contemporary, relevant examples in our daily lives where the difference between the one and the many, or the same and the different, is of special importance? Is there anyone who wants to take that one on? There's a particular, let me just do a screen share here. There's a particular thing that I picked out from recent news, and this is on the cover sheet of the notes for today's session, which are on the shared drive. So on the cover sheet, I put a article from Quantum Magazine. This is back from June 2021. And the headline says, "Same or different? The question flummoxes neural networks." And it's an interesting point that, with the artificial intelligence and the way that we're training artificial intelligence with data, we're just feeding in as much data that we can and try to create these connections between data in what are called these convolutional neural networks, CNNs. And as we're trying to feed in that data, we're trying to tell the artificial intelligence what's the same and what's different. But it's a very difficult thing to program that, because you have to think of all sorts of permutations and combinations. Under certain circumstances, something might be the same as something else. Under other circumstances, it might be different. I really like the way this article starts. The writer says the first episode of Sesame Street in 1969 included a segment called "One of These Things is Not Like the Other." And I remember this very well. When I was a child and watching Sesame Street, I actually remember the little jingle that goes with that. And it's something that I think humans do particularly well, is finding patterns in things. And so this idea of, identifying same and different is particularly important to the development of artificial intelligence now. And in fact, I was attending a Meetup session yesterday on quantum computing, which, as followers of this podcast will know, is a particular interest of mine. And this particular presentation yesterday was on the development of, I think it's called compilers, where they take software code, and there's a software routine that allows the code to be built out without humans writing line by line by line. Because with quantum computing, especially when you start to get hundreds and thousands of qubits, which are the bits in which information is translated or transmitted in quantum computers, it would take forever for a human to write line by line by line. So they have software routines that take, the basic principles that humans input, and then these software routines build out the many, many lines that are involved in the algorithms. And that's another case, I think, of the application of same and different in the development of artificial intelligence, particularly as we're about to enter the era of quantum computing and the vast power and the huge expanse and effect that will have on us. So I thought this was of particular interest. And so, Ron, I see your hand is up. Any thoughts on this?
Yes, this may take the discussion in a different direction, but I'm always very much concerned with what's practical. And I think that you ask about practical applications, and it seems to me that one of the biggest problems today is this sort of bifurcation of society, of choosing between this group or that group, and all the differences that are highlighted. And I think that the alternative path that one could consider practically is to look for what we all have in common. And I would suggest that at the very top of that list of what we all have in common is that every human being is conscious. And if we were to start there, I think our all of our human relationships would take a paradigmatic shift, and we would begin to realize that at the ultimate truth, at the one, there are no differences. It's the same consciousness. So I just offer that up as a theme. If anybody feels that it's worthy of further discussion, but I try to keep it um, uh, be somewhere between the theoretical, but always grounded in the practical. How does what does that mean in my life?
Mm. Well, thank you. That's a good and very powerful point. I think that we can explore, and I like the use of the word common there because I think um, it's something that really resonates in this particular dialogue. Is that we're looking for the common factors, the common elements of things, and instead of looking for the differences, and there's so many differences, but how do we boil it down to the one common thing? So instead of maybe looking for the maximum number of differences, we need to look for the minimum thing, which is the common thing that ties us all together. So I think it's a very powerful point. So thank you for that. And JK?
Yeah, we're talking about a consciousness, a human consciousness that involves you know sensation, pleasure, and reason, right?
Mhm.
And intelligence. So how do you build a computer? How do you program a computer with this combination of the experience of pleasure that we have in life with the notion of this kind of reason and intelligence? I mean, because a computer, I would assume, is only in terms of some kind of intelligible um, program of reasoning, right? It's like it's very purely mathematical, you know. But it seems like in terms of human experience, human consciousness involves a combination of intelligence and sensation and pleasure. How do you how can that be transferred into a computer program?
It's an excellent question. I think it's certainly one that, as I reflect on Phaedrus, which is a dialogue that we did last season, this idea of translation and the difficulties that arise in translation. So the programmers of these algorithms are going to have to translate the idea of pleasure into the machine and into their algorithms. And everybody's idea of pleasure is different from everybody else's. And so, as you say, how is a computer going to recognize what is pleasure? Because, as you pointed out, and as the conclusion of this today's dialogue is that, the best life is a mixture of both pleasure and knowledge. It's neither one or the other. And we've got a good reading today that will show, the deficiencies of either one of those lives on their own. So the conclusion seems to be, as we'll see today, that the mixture of pleasure and knowledge is the best. But then we're just training these algorithms, I think, on knowledge, and then we're allowing the programmers to translate their idea of pleasure into the algorithms. And I think that's a very relevant point to today's world. JK, further?
Yeah, I think that it seems like the pleasurable part of one's human experience is this structure of care, right? I mean, some philosophers have said that we have this structure of care, um, you know, um, but care is a very complicated, maybe a human experience related to more to pleasure uh, than some kind of mathematical, uh, computer program. So yeah, it'd be interesting if ultimately we can build computers that um, can have this kind of this structure of care, as well as that is related more to pleasure, perhaps a pleasurable experience of human interaction or human experience. Yeah.
Care is certainly a good way of putting it, and maybe that could be extended to love. And is there any sort of mathematical uh, expression for something like love, and care? And then, this dialogue today makes the point that we can also derive pleasure from others' pain, which is, this kind of paradoxical thing. I think we saw that in one part of the Republic, when they're talking about, looking at this, disaster scene and other people being tortured, and somehow there's this kind of strange pleasure in it. And, would computers ever understand that sort of idea? Ron, your thoughts?
Thank you. I'll try to be as brief as I can. Consciousness, which I said is the common or unifying factor. Anybody can define consciousness any way they like. So I'll just my simple practical definition of consciousness is if you close your eyes, or you don't even need to close your eyes, everybody is aware of their own existence. And I've never met anybody who has asserted to me, "No, I don't exist." It's ridiculous. Okay. Now, my personal opinion here is that a machine or some kind of algorithms or anything like that simply does not have that consciousness, that sense of awareness. Artificial intelligence, uh, and that sense of awareness, I would call the one, to bring it to this discussion. The many are all the thoughts and feelings that arise in consciousness, which are myriad and many, and those may all be data points and algorithms and computers, et cetera, et cetera. But my feeling is that the one, the consciousness, is something that is only in living beings, and at least from my practical experience, human beings. And to talk about a machine ever being conscious is almost a linguistic oxymoron. And yeah, finished there.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's a fascinating point that you raise. This idea of consciousness, which I think is something that we're going to have to really get into, either today or as we go on, because it's certainly something that pertains to the idea of the soul, which permeates almost all of Plato's dialogues, and certainly is present here. In this idea of understanding yourself, and the difference between yourself and the others, and then that does relate, I think, as you said, to the idea of the one and the many. And so, it's this, I think if I could distill your idea down, it's this idea of self-awareness versus awareness of others. So, yeah, I mean, thank you for that. That's a good point, and something that we should definitely consider today and as we go further. We'll go to Jose.
Yeah, just a quick comment on what Ron was saying. It seems difficult to create consciousness in a robot. But how about the other way around? How about you move my consciousness onto a robot, so then I can run faster as when I was 18. I can swim faster as when I was younger. I don't have any joint pains, but I'm aware, I'm conscious, I'm still around. Anyway, I thought it just occurred to me. It doesn't have to go all the way to creating consciousness. Why don't you just move my consciousness to a more automated entity? That's all.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, and certainly I think there is a movement to develop that sort of capacity, to expand the human existence, to provide it with that kind of fast computational ability. But then I think, obviously the question is to make sure that isn't layered over with other problems at the same time. So, but I know there's people working on it. I think, I think there's some very prominent people working on that right now. So it's a good point to raise. JK?
Yeah, I just wanted to, elaborate or maybe extend this question of consciousness. If perhaps consciousness is merely the relational characteristic of the thing, one individual with the other, with the world, right? And so you could say that consciousness is merely this kind of relational, you know, capacity, you know. And so if you build computers that have this kind of interaction with the world, then it could be a sort of consciousness, and that because you could think of the every aspect of the of the world, things in the world have this kind of relationship with its with the things around it. You know, with even a rock is a thing that has a is this kind of interaction, right? Because if it's on an incline, it will roll down the hill, right? And so it can be affected by the elements in the world. And so if there's always this kind of interaction, and so we get the organic beings, there is more of this kind of interaction, that interdependency or dependency on the world. And so I think a computer is something like that. And so the computer program could be one that is built on this kind of complex relationship with the other, with outside, and kind of interaction with the world, and that you could define consciousness in that way.
I really like the way you use that word relational capacity, because I think that ties very much to today's dialogue, especially when it comes to the unlimited. So we've got this idea in Plato that there are things that have limits and there are things that don't have limits. And in the Republic, we saw the realm of being, which is the past and the future constitute the realm of the being, that is without limit. But what is limited is the realm of becoming, or the state of becoming, which is in the present, and that's full of limits. And so this relational capacity that you talked about, I think, is critical when we're talking about the unlimited. And there's specific words in today's reading that deal with that we'll get to that. This ability to establish this relation between things. And I think that maybe ties to what Ron was saying too, this idea of awareness of self and your relation of yourself to others. And I think that's a pretty key point. And I think I want to actually show this picture here that I've got at the end of the slide. So this is a little problem with relations that arises in artificial intelligence. And this is what happened with Google in 2015. So artificial intelligence is categorizing things, and it was trained with data sets, like thousands and thousands, millions of data points, to recognize things in pictures. So pictures were fed into this Google engine using whatever algorithms they use. They didn't disclose what the basis of the algorithms were. But in 2015, there's 6 pictures here on the screen for those who can't see. There's 6 pictures, and 5 of them are correctly identified or correctly categorized by the artificial intelligence. There's an image of skyscrapers, an image of an airplane, picture of cars, bikes, and a graduation scene. And the computer identified or categorized all of those correctly. What it did not categorize correctly is the picture of the 2 Black people, which it applied the word gorillas. And this was a very embarrassing thing for Google back in 2015. And I think they actually, for a period of time, they actually stopped the ability of people to search on the word gorillas because they had to fix their algorithm. But I think this is a problem in terms of what you were just speaking about, JK, this idea that when we establish these relations, the computer doesn't always get it right because it's programmed based on the parameters that we set in it. We can't anticipate all of these different combinations and permutations. There's just infinite numbers of them. And how can we anticipate this? So the computer made this horrible problem of labeling 2 Black people as gorillas. And so I think, they've presumably fixed their algorithms now, but this is the problem. I think this is a really good illustration of the problem of the one and the many, understanding the difference. And so if we say gorilla is one category, how do we pick out the many types of gorillas? And how do we get that categorization correct? And I think that's a very relevant thing to this question of the one and the many or the same and the difference that we'll start today with. So I just wanted to show that image because I think it was a really powerful illustration of the problem and of the ability of humans. Our ability to recognize patterns and to categorize things is still unparalleled. As powerful as the computers are, our ability to recognize patterns is still unparalleled. And that's what that article, that I showed on the screen from Quantum Magazine started with. Like as a child, I was watching Sesame Street and I was categorizing one of these things is the same and one of these things is different. I was playing that game. And it's something that children do very well. Something that computers maybe don't do as well. Joel, your thoughts?
Yes, please. So I would like, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
So I would just like to ask a favor, like just for clarification. So when we're trying to distinguish the difference between the one and the many and say ourselves and consciousness between AI, what exactly are we pointing to as the difference per se? Because on one hand, the mistake that the algorithms made on Google, even though that's an incorrect observation, like at one point, we can use the example of human history. At one point, that's what people in the past thought too. We've made that mistake as well, right? So, what exactly would be the difference, and why are we pointing to the algorithm that made the same mistake we essentially made too, right? So, how are we separating the one from the many from AI? Well done.
That's a great question. I like that. It's and I would ask everybody for their opinion on that. I mean, my thinking is that the difference is in our capacity to learn from our mistakes and to evolve and maybe to use what JK called earlier as caring. That ability that maybe we haven't developed ability yet to program algorithms to care. And so because we care, we can learn from our experiences. I mean, that's just my take on it. But anybody else who'd like to contribute a thought to that excellent question is more than welcome to. Steve, welcome. And we'll go Steve, then Hari, and then Bill. Steve.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to make 2 points. One on what Ron had said earlier about the consciousness. That consciousness itself possibly could just be an illusion that this organic machine or this living organism uses as a survival mechanism. Or just 2 different examples of the self being interpreted differently. There's this thing when people lose a limb, they have the false limb pain where they still think they have a limb. Or say, well, like when a very experienced race car driver, the car actually becomes a extension of the self that they can make adjustments, quickly the same way we would do when we're walking. So that might be and the idea that consciousness is a connection that is, overriding. That possibly could just be, from the limited perspective to where we are right now, where we've evolved to, and for just the purpose of survival. And the other point on the learning, I'm not an expert in computers, but I've read that some neural network computers, like the one that's AlphaGo that Google created to play Go, that it actually does that not by learning all the moves, which would have been impossible for a game of Go, but by learning from its mistakes. So I think there is examples of algorithms learning, and a lot of the, again, from my understanding, a lot of the the computers the algorithms that are being used now are neural nets that learn, and it's really teaching a computer an algorithm to learn from its own mistakes. And I think putting a limit on that is just based on us not having seen something progress to a higher point. I don't think there's any necessary limitation that an algorithm couldn't evolve itself to the point where it could gain consciousness of its own self. Those were just a couple of points I had to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I like that idea that there may be no limitation on the way that computers can learn, and I think that's probably where we need to go with our own development of artificial intelligence, is to build a system that has no limitation to its ability to learn. And that may be what they called at one point good old-fashioned AI, which is not AI that is based on just feeding in as much data as possible, but AI that's actually has an ability to think and create its own relations and doesn't depend on other people to tell it what the relations are. Because one of these big problems now with machine learning is the human biases that are fed into it. So, for example, facial recognition software still has a very significant error rate in identifying minorities. It's good at identifying white people because it's mostly programmed by white people, but to identify minorities, there's still a lot of errors, and that's because our own biases are being fed into it. And so, as you said, Steve, it's how do we create it so that it's free of those biases and therefore unlimited in its capacity to learn. And I think that's the challenge before us. And I think that's the place of philosophy in this whole question of artificial intelligence design. And I think that's where we really need to amplify the role of philosophy in these questions. They're very good questions and very good points. So thank you for that. And we'll move to Hari, if I got your name right.
Yeah, I'm Hari.
Hari, okay.
So I don't have the intellectual mastery in this subject, but I'm just sharing my observation only. So regarding the artificial intelligence, what I see is it's already being used, like, for example, the auto run car, and in the hospital, so many things have been already automated. Those are the smaller scale of the AI, but it probably has a room to grow really, really far and very, very. So AI can be as imaginative as the people can logic. I think that's what I see. So, but one thing, my fear about this AI especially is AI itself is not bad, but the way, the speed we are going without the process that helps it to identify whether the AI that we are introducing will have no negative impacts in the society. I mean, or less impact in the society. I don't see that process in a place in this the IT world. What I see in the AI world is doing faster, quick, making more money. And my fear is with this fast everything, quick everything, and making more money all the time, probably my fear is hopefully it will not lead us to some kind of disaster. Like in the weaponized world, we had the horse fighting, then we went to gun, and we end up with a nuclear bomb, and now we don't know how to get rid of that and when it will be exploded with a madman hand. So that's my fear, but I think the AI itself has the huge potential. I don't know how far it can go, because like the car, self-driving car is like amazing. How can like this unimaginable things, but so amazing thing it is. But just like everything else, we go extreme. And this AI also, I feel like sometime we are going to the extreme, and there is no the process or mechanism in place that analyze the impacts the AI will introduce. I also see introducing those kind of process in place will curtail the innovation. I see that logics as well. So it's some kind of balance. I think some kind of overseeing mechanism needs to be placed to save the humanity. That's what I think. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that observation. I think you made some very good and interesting points there. This idea, first of imagination and how that's dealt with in the AI, and then, this idea of, maybe ensuring that the speed of the process is such that it has the ability to apply some brakes if brakes are necessary on things, to avoid those negative consequences that you talked about. In fact, in that meetup yesterday that I attended on quantum computing that I mentioned a bit earlier, I asked the presenter how their software, which is this compiling software that allows the machine itself to build out its own code. Once the human inputs the constraints or the parameters, then the machine builds out its own code. And I asked, how do you know, or what sort of controls are there to guard against unintended consequences? Because there's many things, and you use the example, Harry, of the self-driving cars. There's many examples in self-driving cars of unintended consequences. Like, for example, I was reading something that, if a white plastic bag, like a shopping bag, happens to blow up in the air in front of the camera of the car might think that that's snow, and the car might then react differently than if it understood that it was a white plastic bag. And so there's all of these sorts of unintended consequences, and it's particularly difficult with AI because there's some very long-tailed consequences. Like the probability of something occurring could be 1 in a million or 1 in a billion, and so you don't tend to think of that when you're programming it. But then, then these things happen, in combination a lot more commonly than they happen individually. And that's what's called the long tail problem. So, it's a bit of this question of, like, the butterfly effect. I think that movie was out like a dozen years ago or something like that, So you get this little thing happening on one side of the world, like a butterfly flapping its wings, and it has all of these consequences that we couldn't possibly think about. And I think that's really part of this question of the one and the many, understanding this ability to categorize things and to make sure that that we get it right, or at least that there's some controls in the system, as you said, that will help to stop it, before it causes any serious problems. So thank you for that. We'll go to Bill and then Jason. Then I'd like to do a reading starting from 16C. So maybe we'll do that after Jason. So Bill. You're on mute. There.
Yes, I just wanted to say that from my perspective, the part of the mind is like a computer. And I think AI can eventually, theoretically, it could mimic the operation of the mind with enough sophistication. But there's another part of the mind that is beyond that. It's the you can call it the soul or the consciousness, and a computer cannot be an observer of itself. So, when we make decisions, we make them based on logic. But then there's another part of us that oversees that evaluates it, that decides on whether this is a moral thing to do, or it's appropriate, or it makes sense. And so it's outside of the mind, outside of the rational part of the mind, maybe. And I don't know if an AI can do that.
That is a really fascinating question, and the use of the term, or the question whether the computer can observe itself. I think that's very critical, especially as we get into the realm of quantum computing, because the quantum realm has this characteristic of the observer principle. So once you observe something, you change it. You change the quantum effect of something, and these new computers are entangling with the quantum realm, and so we don't understand how that observer effect works in the quantum realm currently. We just understand that if you observe a process, the outcome changes compared to if you didn't observe the process. And that's very important, this question of observation. So as conscious individuals, we can observe ourselves, but can the machine observe itself? So a very, very key question, I think. And so thank you very much for that. We'll go to Jason, and then we'll do Joel, and then we'll do the reading. Jason, welcome.
Hello there. I have two questions. One is that, forgive me that I'm not expert in AI intelligence, but I was wondering, does AI work in the way that it requires external data input in order to process the interaction between environment and itself? Is that how it works, or?
Yeah, I think that's my understanding of how it works.
Okay, so basically you need to keep collecting data in order to calculate the algorithm that can justify the action of the intelligence.
Yeah, my understanding is that it takes in the data, and then the algorithm tells it how to process the data in order to produce an output.
Okay, so without reliable source of data, AI will not be solely depend on itself to proclaim the right action.
Mm-hmm. I think that, and I think that's what we're talking about, is this idea of the reliability of the data, and the relevance of the data too. I think that the data have to be not just correct pieces of data, but they have to be correctly classified.
And that has to depend on the whatever external environment input into the data that will create this internal intelligence. But my I guess my next question is that why does AI technology industry today set trajectory towards investing so much resources to develop or advance technology that apart from the investing in human capitals? And it seems that we as humans solely depend on technology in one way, process instead of both ways, reciprocal. So basically, we as consumer, we spend our consumption based on our requirement of technologies, and in return, we don't get as much as reward or feedback in terms of information and knowledges. I mean, it depends on personal preference, because some people will search for knowledge. It's their choice to, based on internet platform or whatever social network platform. But a lot of technology just built based on impulses, and it doesn't really educate you in a way that feeds you back with economic rewards, rather than just extracting a lot of data and information from consumers and create this one-way, hierarchy structure. That is that consumer feedback to the technology company, and technology company use data to create this artificial intelligence, so they can build something and feedback to the consumer with the product. So consumer keep consuming. This is not, I don't think it's a fair play in many ways. And it's not even enhance the growth of relationship. It just segregate the relationship in many ways.
I think you've hit, Jason, on a very important point, that relates probably to the economic model that we work under. But I think it's a very critical point. And the word that you used, reciprocity, I think is so key, that we have to have reciprocity with our technology. And this is something that I have a particular interest in, because I am particularly attracted to the philosophy of Ursula Franklin, who was a humanist and physicist and Holocaust survivor. And she wrote and spoke about our use of technology. And technology, she said, can be either prescriptive, it can tell us what to do, or it can be holistic in holistic technology is one that has reciprocity, so that if a technological process is not working optimally or is not serving our needs, then we have the ability to change it. It's not prescribing what we need to do. We have the ability to change it. And I think that's the reciprocity that you're talking about, but it's probably a function of the economic model that reciprocity is not necessarily there all the time. But I think that's very critical, and something I think that speaks very much to Philebus and Plato's other dialogues, is this idea that, as we get more and more powerful with our technology, we have to ensure that humans are still the focus of the process. So thank you very much, and for that use of the word reciprocity. I think it really highlights a very key issue. We'll go to Joel, and then we'll do the reading at 16C.
Do you want to go ahead for the reading? Mine's a quick question. We can do it after the reading if we're pressed for time.
Yeah, no, you might as well go ahead, and then we'll do the reading after.
Okay. So my question is, in terms of, again, it's really fun trying to compare what we identify as consciousness towards ourselves versus AI, and trying to split the difference between the two once again, because I would like to ask, is us saying a priori in advance, like there are certain things that a computer or AI won't be able to do. Is that a premature observation to make on behalf of AI, considering when it even comes to our side of the fence, whether we're talking dualism, for example, whether the mind is somehow non-physical or separate from material, when we ourselves can't even fully wrap our heads around how consciousness works to begin with? Is it fair to also assume on behalf of AI that is like to already invoke some sort of limitation, since is it premature to say, since we don't even understand how consciousness works, to just assume, oh yeah, AI is not going to be able to pull it off either, right? Like, are we justified in making that assumption before we have all of the relevant information to begin with?
Good question. I don't have the answer. I would be inclined to hope that that we can work in tandem with AI, and if it becomes conscious, we can sort of there's that reciprocity that Jason just spoke about. That it works, but as you said, we don't even understand how our own mental processes work fully. And so how can we assume that AI won't achieve that same state? But I think the basis of it is that we are the ones who are developing the AI, although more and more we are ceding that development to the AI itself. As I said, with these quantum algorithm compilers, we are allowing the machines to do a lot of their own programming. It's still based on the parameters that we input, but we've got to be very careful to make sure that we don't run into those unintended consequences, that those are carefully controlled. So it's a good question, and something that we can definitely consider, and others are welcome to contribute to that response as well. So I just thought I would go to this reading starting at 16C, going to 17A, and I don't know if I would have any volunteers to read this, or I can read it. This is just talking about this idea of the unlimited versus the limited, and the intermediates. And I think there's a line in here that just really resonated with that Google gorilla picture that I showed a few minutes ago. And so maybe I'll just go ahead and read this then. So this is from the text. It's starting at 16C. For everything in any field of art that has ever been discovered has come to light because of this. It is a gift of the gods to men, or so it seems to me, hurled down from heaven by some Prometheus, along with the most dazzling fire. And the people of old, superior to us and living in closer proximity to the gods, have bequeathed us this tale, that whatever is said to be consists of one and many, having in its nature limit and unlimitedness. Since this is the structure of things, we have to assume that there is in each case always one form for every one of them, and we must search for it, and we will indeed find it there. And once we have grasped it, we must look for two, as the case would have it, or if not, for three, or for some other number. And we must treat every one of those further unities in the same way, until it is not only established of the original unit that it is one, many, and unlimited, but also how many kinds it is. For we must not grant the form of the unlimited to the plurality before we know the exact number of every plurality that lies between the unlimited and the one. Only then is it permitted to release each kind of unity into the unlimited and let it go. The gods, as I said, have left us this legacy of how to inquire and learn and teach one another. But nowadays, the clever ones among us make a one haphazardly and a many faster or slower than they should. They go straight from one to the unlimited and omit the intermediates. It is these, however, that make all the difference as to whether we are engaged with each other in dialectical or only in heuristic discourse. And I thought, particularly that line in there that says, "For we must not grant the form of the unlimited to the plurality before we know the exact number of every plurality that lies between the unlimited and the one." I thought that line applied particularly to that error that the Google image classification in 2015 made with the gorillas. And so I just wonder what people think about this particular section of the dialogue. There's a couple of things I would point out. I guess when he says the one, when Socrates says the one, there's a point at 15b that says one is that which allows neither generation nor destruction. So one is the unlimited. One is the finality. There's no changing the one. There's no adding to it. There's no subtracting it. So the one is the final. It's the enduring thing. And when he says unlimitedness, I was thinking about the meaning of that. The universe, as far as we know, is unlimited. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, which is we know as pi, is unlimited. So there are things that are unlimited, but I was thinking, essentially maybe is what he's talking about here in terms of unlimitedness, maybe meaning potential. And then there's this wonderful idea, he extols this idea of this mix of the limited and the unlimited as a gift from the gods. And I was thinking, is that really true? Is it in fact a good thing that we have in everything this kind of infinite potential of unlimit, and also the limits? And again, as I said in the introduction, I think this maybe ties to the Republic, when we saw, and also to Timaeus that we did last season, this idea that there is in existence infinite being, which is in the past and the future, and there is limits in the state of becoming, which is in the present. So we have this combination of limits in the present and the lack of limits in the past and the future, and everything has this combination. And he says it's a gift to the gods. And so maybe is it really, is it a question of, does that presence of the unlimit give us this infinite potential to explore and to discover? Steve, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. When you were reading it, it made me think of Zeno's paradox with the Achilles racing the rabbit and the turtle, and the turtle is at the head start, but Achilles can only run halfway to the turtle before he runs another halfway at infinite. So before we know the number of every polarity which lies between the unlimited and the one, that really is an unlimited amount. You can always cut something in half again, a half. And second thought was that the unlimited is just a concept that can we really that there's an unlimited human potential, there's an unlimited universe. That's a concept. There very well might be a limited universe. It's not something that we can determine scientifically. So it's like a fact that we can never really have any security in knowing is true. And is that can we only function within the range? It's like can we only function within the range of the limited? We can't The unlimited is a concept, but we can't really function within the range of the unlimited, except in forming a limited concept of what the unlimited is. Thank you.
I like that limited concept of the unlimited. That's great use of words, I think, there. And yeah, I mean, actually, you mentioned Zeno's paradox, which is something that when we get to Parmenides in maybe about a month, I wanted to talk about Zeno's paradox, and I think that's a good example of and as you said, this idea of being able to divide everything continuously in half, in half, in half. And there is no limit maybe to how much we can divide in half. Certainly, if we think about mathematics and the real line is infinitely dense. And for every space that a particular number occupies in the real line, you can further, there's an infinite recursion of that space into subdivisions of that number. So there's another example of the unlimitedness of something. Yeah, I think this limited understanding of the unlimited, I think, is a really interesting way of putting it. So thank you for that. We'll go to Jason and then JK.
Actually, I do my own research sometimes to study about social issues around my community as well as international communities. And there's something I realize that like I find that individual potential is unlimited, but why that someone is more excelled than others in different environments, especially why some communities emphasize on education and growth more than other communities. Um, I personally think that we as a society have responsibility to nourish this environment for the growth of individual potentials. But why the way we operate society in the way that limits individual potential is very peculiar. Because you can argue that maybe it's because of social segregation, social inequality, gender inequality, all kinds of elements. But I just think that whereas society trace back to the beginning, why is that we have such tribalism in our conscience that we always build a hierarchy society rather than society with the adversity? That's just amazes me. So I mean that also limits a lot of individual potentials in our society as well as community.
That's a good observation, and I think this idea of these limits that seem to be put on individual potential, that may actually speak to some of the words in this particular reading that we just did. And I'm thinking the words again, for we must not grant the form of the unlimited to the plurality before we know the exact number of every plurality that lies between the unlimited and the one. And I'm thinking that maybe some of these constraints that are put on people either by their tribal group or their society or the particular learning that they've been brought up in may be not taking into account that number of plurality, that they're saying that this is the only way that it can be. Well, maybe that's not the only way that it can be. And before we reach that unlimited state to say it's the only way that it can be, we need to look at all of the different possibilities that lie between what is and what can be, to achieve that full potential. And so I like the way that you put that in a social context, and I think that may speak to the words that are in this section. So thank you for that. JK, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what the meaning of this idea of unlimited and limited, and that the one is the unlimited. But why couldn't you think of the becoming the plurality of the present as the unlimited as well, in terms of plurality continuously occurring, in the process of time, of change.
Mm-hmm.
And so wouldn't the state of becoming be more of the unlimited? Whereas if you think about the one and the unlimited as being the as being the true unlimited, it's that isn't that a concept that you have about what the one is, about what is, that being the one being unlimited? Because how do you know what that one is? I mean, except by your own conception of what that is. Whereas you experience the unlimited of the state of becoming, which is a constant plurality, the many, right? That arises from that state of becoming and change. Maybe that's just a different perspective of looking at it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. This idea that the state of becoming, there seems to be no limit to what can happen in the state of becoming. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of the dispute between Heraclitus and Parmenides.
Mm-hmm.
Whose student was Zeno, right? And came up with the Zeno's paradox of and the paradox is you assume that there is one that is unlimited, but it doesn't. It's as though it's taking time and spatializing time. It's rather than accepting time as the more real, as equally real with space. It seems to be imposing a kind of a spatial dimension onto time, and in that sense, it ignores the process of time of change. And so you come up with this. He comes up with this paradox, but there wouldn't be a paradox if he didn't do that, right? Because he's assuming that the one is the unlimited, and so it can be divided into infinite, decimals after each right, each halfway point.
I think the idea is that the one can not be further divided, and so then because it cannot be divided, it has no further limits. It's the divisions that are the limits. That's my understanding of it. And I just there's a couple of examples here that we can talk about that Socrates brings into it. First of all, there was the example that was used in the Republic, which I thought was pretty effective, and that was where Socrates held up three fingers, as I'm doing now, and he says, we know that these are fingers, so that there's the one form of these three things. They're fingers, but they have different properties. Some fingers can be wrinkly, some fingers can be smooth, some fingers can be short and stubby, some can be long. They can be different colors, different lengths, and all of that. So, the oneness is the finger, or the form of the finger, whereas the many is the many types of divisions into which finger can be divided. And then I think that there's some really effective examples in today's reading of the distinction between the one and the many at 17, just looking at 17D to E and 18C. So 17D to E, Socrates talks about, for example, our spoken language. And there's infinite range to the sounds that we can all produce, but there is one meaning for each of the sounds so that we understand each other. Because if you made a vowel sound of an O, I understand what the O means, but you can make that sound in any different tone or range, and I'll still understand what it means. I thought that was a particularly effective example at 17C, and then at 17D he talks about music, and understanding again the differences in the pitch. And the character and the intervals of those pitch in the music that gives rise to harmony, which we understand. But there are many intervals and many different pitches and and characteristics in that music. And so I thought those were particularly effective examples of the use of the one and the many. But I don't know what others think about that. We'll go to Ron and then Jane and Jason. Ron.
Forgive me, because I'm going to think out loud, and please stop me when I've gone too long. But I'm trying to get a handle, so to speak, on the one and the many, or the limited and the limitless. Mm-hmm. And the many or the limited, I would call maybe for communication purposes, personal consciousness that you and I have. And that's very limited because it has a beginning and an end, right? You don't remember your beginning, but your parents told you had a beginning, and at some point you will have an end when that body will no longer be conscious, and that's personal consciousness. And that's limited. Unlimited might be that within the arising of that individual consciousness, there was something, again, for the sake of communication and the limitations of language, let's call it cosmic consciousness or something like that, which embraces all the individual consciousnesses. That might be the one. That might be the limitless. And to suppose that the limited, the individual consciousness, what we normally we operate with, will be able to encompass the universal consciousness. That doesn't seem possible. But at the other hand, the question is, have we done a mistaken identity? And instead of identifying with the unlimited consciousness, have we mistakenly identified with the limited consciousness, and then, like having enclosed ourselves in this paper bag, so to speak, we're trying to punch our way out, and it's just it's not going to be a difference in quantity. It's going to be a difference in kind. Anyway, I said I was thinking out loud, and I know I can go on forever, but I think I better stop here.
Those are great questions, Ron, and thank you for that. I think, and it's good that you call into question this idea or this distinction between the unlimited and the limited. I think we have to recall here too, the view of Plato and Socrates, that the soul has no limit. And I think that's maybe one of the more contentious things in the history of philosophy. I think there's probably certain schools that think that the soul is limited to the life of the body, so the soul inhabits the body, and when the body dies, the soul dies with it. But I think, in the Republic, he was very clear that that wasn't the case. I think we'll see when we look at Phaedo in our next few episodes, we'll see again that that's not the case, at least according to Socrates. So the soul is something which has no limit. You use the term beginning and end, Ron, which I think is key to understanding the difference between limit and unlimited. So the unlimited would have no beginning and no end. And the limited would have beginning and end. So the physical body has a beginning and an end. And anything physical, in fact, has a beginning and an end. So all of physics has a beginning and an end. But the thing that doesn't have a beginning and an end, according to Socrates, would be the soul. And, maybe the universe as well, as far as we know, has no beginning and no end. If we accept certain ideas about the origin of the universe. So I think there's that kind of distinction, the idea of beginning versus end, or no beginning and no end, that something just continually just goes round and around and around. And that would be the unlimited. And I think you use the term cosmic consciousness, and maybe that's the kind of context of, something that may be unlimited without beginning or end. So So thank you for raising that, and certainly we can explore that and get other people's ideas on that question. We'll go to Jane and then Jason.
When I was reading the dialogue, I had this reoccurring question of whether the word the one is being used in two different definitions. So there's the one as a particular object, as a singularity, and the one which is a general, a unity, a plurality of the many. And within the context of the all of these Socratic dialogues, the one is something that is unlimited, it is non-material, it is the same, it is a state of being. And from what I understand, the state of being, even though it is non-material, so it's not within our material world, it does encompass and sort of shadow all the potential states of becoming, which are actually limited. I think, yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The idea of is one the unity or the combination, I think is what you're saying, or is it a singularity that can't be divided? And so I think that's the question. I think when the part that this dialogue starts with the question of whether the life of pleasure is better than the life of knowledge. And we'll see in the next reading that we'll go to, actually, I'll just put it on the screen while we talk, what happens when they put that on trial. And they realize as they talk about this that pleasure is one thing, but it has many different manifestations. Knowledge is one thing, but it has many different manifestations. And so maybe that helps to put in context your question, Jane, this idea of, can the one be divided? Well, can pleasure itself be divided, or is there just different types of pleasure? So pleasure is still one thing, but it has many different ways of showing itself, some of which are true and some of which are false. Same with knowledge. So maybe that's one way of thinking about it. But we'll get others' opinions on that too. Jason, your thoughts?
I was wondering what Jane mentioned when she compared the one as unification of plurality that shadows the potential of individuals, individuality. I come to thoughts. It made me think that in the religious concept, when Jesus is the one, and we're created in the image of God. So, in that sense, Jesus, whatever we think about Jesus, is a perfect being, and he reflects in our daily lives the way we should be. So, the society, does society need to promote this kind of ethical concept of what humans should be in a moral sense in order to advance in polarity of many things? For example, like cultural, technology, economic, and because ethic is the foundation of many things. Without ethic, people can neglect and can be selfish. So in the religion, Jesus is a moral being, so he's the foundation of the church. And can society form this kind of foundation based on ethical principles?
Mm-hmm. So as I understand the question, it's, can we look to this one being or this one concept And can we say that ethically that's what we should comply to? This one principle. If in that example, is Jesus the first principle? Maybe, and that's what we should comply to. It's an interesting question, and certainly, with ethics, I think that's maybe Plato and Socrates are more on the lines of justice that we talked about when we looked at the Republic. And instead of prescribing what people should do based on our perception of something, because there's people who believe in Jesus and people who don't, and people say that he thought one thing and others say that he thought other things, and so we get into all this confusion and difference. Maybe it's this sense of justice rather than prescriptive ethics that Socrates is more in favor of. But it's a good question. So we'll see what people think about that. We'll go to Bill and then JK and then Ron.
Now, this question of one and the multitude or the many. As I see it, for example, let's take love. Love is one thing. However, it can be expressed in many different ways. So, but the question is love the same? Is it the same in every situation? Is the basic concept of love the same, and its expression that is different? That's something that I've considered, and I'd be happy to hear what other people think about that. It's the expression that makes it into the many.
A good question and thought there. The expression, and certainly, I'd point out at 15D to E. Socrates says, by making the point that it is through discourse that the same thing flits around, becoming one and many in all sorts of ways. So I think he's just saying what you just said, Bill, is that it's the expression of it. It's when I say what I think love is versus what you say love is versus what everybody else says. Each one of us is going to have a bit of a different concept, and that comes out in discourse. But then I think what he's saying is that in dialectic, which is where we go back to first principles, that's where we find the one. And I would just reemphasize again what I mentioned before at 15b to 16a. There's this line that, the one and the same admits neither of generation nor of destruction. So, again, that idea that you cannot add to it, generation, or destruction, you can't subtract from it. It is what it is. Like, love will always be love, but we have different concepts. We have many different concepts of what it will be, but the general category of love will always be one. I think so. If that's maybe a way of addressing it, one is kind of the boundary condition. It's finding that boundary that is the challenge, and that's in discourse, as you said, and as Socrates says at 15e. We'll go to JK and then Ron.
Yeah, I assume that he's in his dialogue, he's identifying the one with the intelligence, right? Reason and intelligence, and the pleasure and pain with the many, right? But he's also saying that they come together. That a life is a combination of both, right? And so you can't separate the one from the many. You can't separate pleasure from intelligence and intelligence from pleasure. And so, in a sense, our existence, our being able to be part of the procreative evolutionary process really depends on the pleasure principle, right? Because if you think of yourself as a human being, you came into this world out of pleasure, for life, out of the pleasure principle, I believe, right? And so it does, you do have to think of, is that pleasure principle unlimited or is it limited? And so I'm just kind of raising this question, thinking out loud, and whether which is more true. And if you insist that it's not, and that it's intelligent, the reason is really what is the one, what is unlimited, and that sets the boundary. Then you're kind of like cutting yourself off from one's history, right? One's evolutionary history. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, to anybody.
Thanks for that. And yeah, certainly. And in this next reading that we'll do, maybe after Ron talks about this mixture of pleasure and knowledge in what they think is the best life. And then there was this part here. So you mentioned, is there limit to pleasure? And I just, would call into attention 26b or 26c, where Socrates says, "It is the goddess herself, fair Philebus, who recognizes how excess and the overabundance of our wickedness allows for no limit in our pleasure and their fulfillment, and she therefore imposes law and order as a limit on them. And while you may complain that this ruins them, I, by contrast, call it their salvation." So I think there he's saying that there is no limit to pleasure, but we put limit on it to save pleasure from its own destruction, and that is placed on it by reason, and that's something that we can explore a bit more. So we'll go to Ron, and then maybe we'll do this reading. I don't know if I could read Socrates, or if anybody else wants to read Socrates. If there's a volunteer for Protarchus as well, we could do that. So, Ron, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, James, I'm just going to be thinking out loud just for a minute or two, and then you will make some sense of what I've been thinking about. So, Jesus, the statement is attributed to him, "I and the Father are one." Jesus was just a name, but Jesus was the Christ consciousness. Jesus Christ consciousness. And Christ consciousness has often been associated with what I referred to before as cosmic consciousness, but a better term, I couldn't think of it at the moment, would be universal consciousness, because maybe cosmic has a little woo-woo in it. Universal just means uni. It means one consciousness. So universal consciousness or Christ consciousness. Now, I think in Western philosophy, there are basically, not in philosophy worldwide, there are dualists and non-dualists, one way of categorizing it. And I think that Plato was a non-dualist, and I think Plotinus as a Neoplatonist made it even clearer that, and by non-dual, he was saying ultimately, I believe that there's only the universal consciousness, the one, which he labeled the good. And a modern version of that would be a physicist by the name of David Bohm, who spoke about the implicate order and the explicate order. The implicate order was the one, and the explicate was the many as it unfolded. But he called it infinite potential when one is connected to the implicate order, or the universal consciousness, or the Christ consciousness, or the one. And that's limitless, no beginning, no end. And the other is dualism. Once you move from the one to the two, and then the many, there's no end to that sort of rabbit hole. Anyway, I'll stop there if you can make some sense of what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And I think that's one of that, that rabbit hole that you talked about. I think that's why Socrates is saying that we need to know the exact number of the intermediates between the one or between the unlimited and the limited. And, certainly, you raised a number of interesting points, this idea of universal. And, I was actually having a discussion with Joel, who's on here the other day, is there one universe or a multiverse? And I think this is one of the big questions in physics now. Plato is on record as saying that there is only one. That's the thinking behind Socrates, but we can differ on that. But at some point, maybe there are some universals, like with that example that I did with my fingers earlier, which Socrates did in the Republic, there is that universal form of finger. So whatever many different types of finger there are, many characteristics, there is still the one form of the finger. And so, I think that's that maybe non-dualist idea. And you mentioned the soul, and I would just, call out around 30, between 30 and 31 in the dialogue, there's this whole discussion about the soul and the source of the soul being the universe. And so there is not just a soul in the individual, there's a soul in the universe. So that's part of the logic in this particular dialogue. And then you mentioned the good, which, I've just got a little note at the top of this next reading in 20D. The good is defined as perfect and sufficient and that which everybody desires. Furthermore, in the Republic, the form of the good is defined as that which gives knowledge to the things known and the power to know to the knower. That was the definition of the good, the form of the good in the Republic. And so, there's maybe some sort of universal concepts in the good that we can explore. So thank you for tying those different ideas together or bringing those points up. JK?
Yeah, I just want to point out that you can also get lost in the rabbit hole of universals, in which as a life, as a living being, you cut yourself off from the living natural process, and you impose certain orders of standards of good and otherwise in terms of good and evil, right? And so there are some more modern philosophers who have criticized that whole history of getting lost in the rabbit hole of rationalism and the rationalism of universals, and you deny yourself as being an individual, or deny yourself one's natural tendencies to behave as a living being in nature. And so it could go either way. So I think there's kind of a moderation, a point of that he's making this dialogue is pointing out that life is a combination of both the pleasure principle and the and intelligence and reason, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, as pointed out by some modernist philosophers, that we can't deny we are part of the natural process of the many. At the same time, you can also understand yourself as part of the universal one. Yeah. So it's not, you can't, you don't want to go too far in either extreme, of course.
Yeah. And certainly, that it is all about that combination and that mixture that I think that Socrates talks about here, that the difficulty of making that mixture is understanding the ratio of limit and unlimit that goes into that mixture of both. And so I think that's the key. And you use the word rationalism of universals. And so I would take the root rational ratio from that word rationalism. And there's actually discussion in this dialogue. If you look at, it's around 25b, that says, we have this problem with the unlimited, is that we cannot divide it. Like there is no, as I said in the introduction, you cannot say what the greatest is when you're talking about the unlimited, because there is no greatest, there is no least. there's no beginning, there's no end. So you cannot establish these absolute measures, and therefore you're left to deal with ratios. And so he talks about, instead of saying the greatest, when we're looking for the first principle of something, we look for less and more. We look for these relative terms, and that allows us to provide this ratio of this mixture. So let's maybe just take a look at this section from 20E to 22A. And do we have any volunteers for either role, Socrates or Protarchus? I could do Socrates if nobody else wants. Is there anybody volunteering for Protarchus? Or I could do both.
Yeah, I could do Protarchus.
Okay. Thank you, JK. So this is from 20E to 22A. And again, this is having defined at 20D the good as perfect, sufficient, and that which is hunted for or universally desired. So Socrates starts, "So let us put the life of pleasure and the life of knowledge on trial and reach some verdict by looking at them separately. Let there be neither any knowledge in a life of pleasure, nor any pleasure in that of knowledge. For if either of the two is good, then it must have no need of anything in addition. But if one or the other should turn out to be lacking anything, then this can definitely no longer be the real good we are looking for."
What could it be?
So shall we then use you as our test case to try both of them?
By all means.
Would you find it acceptable to live your whole life in enjoyment of the greatest pleasures?
Why, certainly.
And would you see yourself in need of anything else if you had secured this altogether?
In no way.
But look, might you not have some need of knowledge, intelligence, and calculation, or anything else that is related to them?
Also, if I had pleasure, I would have all in all.
And living like that, you could enjoy the greatest pleasures throughout your life?
Why should I not?
Since you would not be in possession of either reason, memory, knowledge, or true opinion, must you not be in ignorance, first of all, about this very question, whether you were enjoying yourself or not, given that you were devoid of any kind of intelligence?
Necessarily.
Moreover, due to lack of memory, it would be impossible for you to remember that you ever enjoyed yourself, and for any pleasure to survive from one moment to the next, since it would leave no memory. But not possessing right judgment, you would not realize that you are enjoying yourself even while you do. And being unable to calculate, you could not figure out any pleasures for yourself. You would thus not live a human life, but the life of a mollusk, or one of those creatures in shells that live in the sea. Is this what would happen, or can we think of any other consequences beside these?
Well, could we?
But is this a life worth choosing?
Socrates, this argument has left me absolutely speechless for the moment.
Even so, let us not give in to this weakness. Let us, in turn, rather inspect the life of reason.
What kind of life do you have in mind?
Whether any one of us would choose to live in possession of every kind of intelligence, reason, knowledge, and memory of all things, while having no part, neither large nor small, of pleasure or of pain, living in total insensitivity of anything of that kind.
To me, at least, neither of these two forms of life seems worthy of choice, nor would it be to anyone else, I presume.
But what about a combination of both, Protarchus, a life that results from a mixture of the two?
You mean a mixture of pleasure with reason and intelligence?
Right, those are the ingredients I mean.
Everybody would certainly prefer this life to either of the other two, without exception.
Well, thank you, JK, for helping with that reading. And so this is this kind of interesting scenario where they put the life of pure pleasure on trial against the life of pure knowledge, and they conclude that neither is preferable. Pleasure is not preferable because you would never remember it if you had no knowledge, and you wouldn't even understand what pleasure is. And then, of course, not absolute knowledge would be just kind of maybe boring and pointless. And so, they arrive at the conclusion that the both is the best form of the good life. So your thoughts on that, Bill?
I love how Plato approaches the argument and develops it. It makes so much sense when he speaks this way and writes it this way, and it goes to the heart of the matter.
Yeah, certainly Protarchus is kind of left speechless at one point, and certainly, ends up agreeing. He sees no option. It's just sort of, it seems obvious the way the logic is being presented. Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, problem with the way that the argument is framed, that Socrates, if you go in the first part where you have a life of pleasure, could you scroll back, do you think, a little
Sure.
bit? Yeah, that's good. You were with the life of pleasure, he said, making an assumption that he doesn't really make an argument for, that you wouldn't be in possession of reason, memory, knowledge, or true opinions. He doesn't make it. I don't see any, argument that, that would be the case. I mean, you could say that you have pleasure in knowledge, pleasure in intelligence, pleasure in calculations. It's like, why would somebody do all those in the first place? The first person that, started, I mean, there's no origin, but just, I don't really see that, the one having pleasure precludes having the other. So see a fallacy in his argument, but, that's from my perspective. So maybe I could be corrected.
And thanks for raising that. And I think what they're trying to do in this little trial is that they're trying to say, let's look at one versus the other without mixing them at all. So, first we're going to look at pure pleasure, and then we'll look at pure knowledge. But we have to exclude, when we put this on trial, we have to exclude from pleasure any knowledge, and we have to exclude from knowledge any pleasure. So then you get this trial between these two pure, they don't exist, of course, but these kind of idealized forms of pleasure versus knowledge. And then they realize that there has to be this mix. And I think what particularly struck me in this paragraph that's at the bottom of the page here is this idea that that if you had no knowledge, how would you know that you were enjoying yourself? Because you wouldn't know, because you have no knowledge. And that particularly struck myself. It struck my sense of that. And it makes me think of a lot of things that go on today that are supposed to be pleasurable. Whether it's liking your friends' comments on Facebook or all of these things, do you really have knowledge that that's pleasurable, or are you just doing it because others say it's pleasurable? That's kind of, that's one question, I guess, that we always need to ask ourselves. So I think that's what they're trying to do, is just, to try to, like, it's unrealistic, but they're saying to put it on trial, you have to exclude one from the other. So you have to just look at exclusive pleasure and exclusive knowledge, and then decide, that clearly some mixture of the two is required. JK, sorry, good. Steve, yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but it's, I mean, like what we're doing now, you could say, is a pursuit of knowledge, but I find it pleasurable, so I understand you're saying they separated the two, but I think, in order to separate something and put it on trial, if you were to say that, something is A, and then B, C, and D is not part of that, you'd have to make some argument to say why it would be precluded. So that was all I had on that.
Right. Yeah. And I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah. And certainly, hopefully we do derive both pleasure and knowledge from participating in events like this. So, JK, your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess this is an interesting argument, against hedonism, but also against maybe asceticism, right? Like you said, because if you have just interested in pure knowledge, it brings to mind this kind of asceticism where you deny any kind of, bodily, physical enjoyment, right? So it is a kind of pretty powerful argument, and which is a little bit perhaps different from some of his other arguments, positing the forms and so forth, and somehow everything else is just a copy of the forms, and so they're not real. So somehow your physical experiences in life are not real; they're just copies of these rational forms that are outside of us. Yeah.
I'm not sure that, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure that a copy of something it's not that you could even copy a form, because the form is one and cannot be copied, but it can be varied. And I think that's what he's saying, is that, it's this variation in life that's important. And but as you say, I mean, is that, should all pleasure be removed from life? And I was just, reading a headline, for example, in the news in the past week or two, where, in Afghanistan, for example, people are now not supposed to listen to music. So apparently all music is bad. So is it right to deny people the pleasure of music? Or is it just some music is bad and some music is okay? But again, who's making that judgment? It's when we get down, maybe that's this rabbit hole that was referred to earlier, when we get down into making these judgments. Jose, your thoughts? Oh, sorry.
He's also saying that, also seems to be saying that there is no pleasure in intelligence, intellectual activity. And that is not true, because one does derive pleasure from intellectual pursuits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could also argue that is a kind of maybe a sublimation of the pleasure principle. The intellectual pursuits are.
Yeah, I think Socrates he's not saying that there is no pleasure in knowledge. I think he's just, it's again, for the purpose of this trial, right. They had to remove any combination of the two in order to put each on trial on its own. And then once having put each on trial on its own, they realized that it's really impossible to not involve some combination of the two. Exactly. So there is pleasure in knowledge. I think that's what they're saying. Yeah. We'll go to Jose and then Ron.
Yeah, I was thinking, if to follow this argument, maybe it's helpful to break down or unpack pleasure. And the way I see it, initially, I would unpack it by saying, well, there's obviously physical pleasure. And I would say that maybe for physical pleasure, like eating, like smelling good food or drinking a good wine, I don't need the mind. So I will venture to say that I don't need the intelligence for that. However, there's the other type of pleasure that is mind-driven. For instance, if you feel pleasure and are very happy because your children just finished his or her degree at university, you feel pleasure, you feel gratification. But that wouldn't be possible without the mind. First of all, I mean, as they say, I wouldn't have memory. I wouldn't understand what that was. So there are a lot of things that are pleasures of the mind that come through the mind. The other one, of course, is what I think one of you, JK, was saying, is there's pleasure in finding truth, in intellectual pursuits. Those are pleasures of the mind. And finally, as what Aristotle, I don't know if it's Aristotle, but what some philosophers say is, in fact, if you keep hitting, I think it was Aristotle, if you keep hitting the mean, eventually you start to reach a state of constant pleasure that it is mental, because you now live in such a peaceful state, because you can see truth in every situation. We will never get that, but it's a path or a trajectory that makes sense. So that's all I would say. I mean, I don't know, maybe Socrates would laugh at me, but that would be my simple argument. There are pleasures of the body and pleasures of the mind. Mm-hmm. And of course, you cannot have pleasures of the mind if you don't have a mind or you don't have intelligence. That's all.
Yep. I think a very good point. And certainly in the latter part of Philebus, which we won't get to maybe until some future date, there is a lot of discussion about the different types of pleasures and the different ways of dividing pleasure. And it's quite a complicated discussion, so I think we'll leave that to a future date. But I think here, we may not have time to get this particular reading, but from 34a to C, just to pick up on this difference that you raised, Jose, the pleasures of the body versus the pleasures of the mind. In 34a to C, Socrates talks about two different types of memory. And so there's two different types of memory and recollection. So there's memory, which involves the body. So there, that, for example, would be the pleasures of the body give rise to memories in the body. And then he distinguishes that from recollection, which is what the soul does on its own without the body. And so that would maybe be an example of the pleasures of the mind, because the mind isn't attached to the body. It's separate from the body. It has to be separate from the body because it's the observer of the body. So there's the pleasures of the mind, which that's what the soul recollects on its own without the body. And then there's the memory of the body. So the soul can use either memory or recollection, in forming its meaning, in applying reason. So I think that's a good way maybe of introducing this distinction between memory and recollection, based on the different types of pleasures of the body versus pleasures of the mind. We'll go to Ron.
Yeah, thank you, James. Again, thinking out loud. I think that Plato's putting in the mouth of Socrates an example of what I was referring to earlier as duality. When you set up like different categories, in this case, you set up two separate categories, one called pleasure and another called knowledge. And I think what he's trying to sort of bring the listener of the dialogue toward is that when you are in this world of dualities, the only resolution is going to be when you unify them. And he's taking you there gently by saying here, well, maybe we need both, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But what he's moving the listener towards is the unity, what he calls the one that unifies all of the dualities. Another word he uses is the good for that unity. And I think that because the one, the unity is ineffable, is not actually able to be captured by language, all he can do is lead you closer and closer toward that one, that good, that unity, by showing you the ultimate futility of duality, of the many, of separating things, and that's why I think Plato is so close to many forms of Eastern non-dual philosophy, where they take you from the many to the one. But it has to be done through the vehicle of the mind, and the mind by its nature can only operate in dualities, in binaries. The mind is a limited instrument. It's a magnificent instrument, but it's limited to operating in dualities. It can't operate in the sense of eternal, infinite. It can only, operate in the limited, in the temporal, in the phenomenal, not in the noumenal, so to speak. So I think that from Plato, you're not going to be able to write down a conclusion or even a definition of the good, but he's going to just take you there intuitively, bring you there closer and closer, and then you yourself have to kind of make that ultimate leap. That's that's where I'll stop my thinking out loud for now.
I really like that. And in fact, I look forward to re-listening to what you just said when I listen to the recording of this episode, because I think you really touched on so many important points that really call into our understanding, particularly this little this equation that I put at the top of the next little bit of the reading, which is this idea of combining the unlimited and the limit with a cause. And you talked about unifying the one, and I think that really speaks to the idea of dialectic, where it's not a question, as I said in the introduction, of looking to the greatest of something, because when you're dealing with the unlimited, you'll never find the greatest, because there is no greatest. And so then we're dealing with these relative terms. And so, at 25b, Socrates says that, what we have to look at is opposites and equals. So when we can't determine what the greatest is or what the least is, we can know differences. We can sort out this duality, I think, as you said, by knowing what the opposites are and what the equals are, and then relating number to number and measure to measure. So that paragraph at 25b, where Socrates talks about this understanding of the opposites and equals and measure to measure and number to number, I think is so critical to resolving those dualities that you spoke of. And it's why I think in the Republic, Socrates said that the first order of knowledge for a philosopher is a number and calculation. And I think we'll see more of this when we talk about Phaedo next time, because there's a lot of talk about the equal in Phaedo. And so I think that's very key to understanding these qualifications when we're dealing with universals. So I just wanted to, because we've only got about 5 minutes left here, unfortunately, there's always so much good discussion, and it never leaves enough time to cover everything that we want to cover. But so I just wanted to raise or highlight this last reading, which folks can do on their own maybe, but I'll just do the first reading here from 23C to D. It's a short one where Socrates says, "Let us make a division of everything that actually exists now in the universe into two kinds, or if this seems preferable, into three. We agreed earlier that the God had revealed a division of what is into the unlimited and the limit. Let us now take these as two of the kinds, while treating the one that results from the mixture of these two as our third kind. But I must look quite the fool with my distinctions in two kinds and enumerations." Protarchus says, "What are you driving at?" Socrates says, "That we seem to be in need of yet a fourth kind. Look at the cause of this combination of those two together and posit it as my fourth kind in addition to those three." And so that leads to this little equation that I put at the top of the page. Coming to be, which is in the present. This is Socrates' term for becoming or coming to be. This is what we do in the present. We never achieve a full state of being because that's eternal, but we're always coming to be in the present. So coming to be in the present equals the combination of unlimited and limit. So I put that in brackets, unlimited plus limit in brackets. And I said multiplied by cause. So in this ordering of functions here, and this is what Socrates is saying that we do in our reason, is we apply order to things. So first we take the unlimited. So unlimited is 1, and then limit is 2. So the second thing that we look at is the limit. So we start by looking at the unlimited, then we look at the limit, then we look at the combination of the two, which is the third thing, which is that state of coming to be. And then we say, what is the cause of that? And the cause could be either pleasure or knowledge or the mixture of both. And this is really, I think, a powerful way that Socrates says that we apply reason, is knowing these four different components. So knowing the unlimited, the limit, the combination that results in the state of coming to be, which is in the present, our state of becoming. And then we understand the cause. And the cause could be either pleasure or knowledge, or the combination of both, which has caused us to go in that particular direction. So I think that's kind of a very key theme that they're kind of arriving at in this part of the dialogue. And so I'm just wondering, is there any particular thoughts on that? That combination and that particular ordering, and do we kind of understand this idea of the ordering that we do with our rational sense? We take that empirical data and we apply a rational process of ordering to it to arrive at this kind of combination of unlimited plus limit equals coming to be, and the cause being the fourth element of that mixture. So that's kind of, those are kind of the three themes that I wanted to present in this, and we'll just take some final comments. Ron?
Yes, James. Again, I think Plato is taking you yet a step further toward the limitless. He's leaving you now with a fourth thing, which is the cause. But later, I'm sure it'll be very easy for him to show that in order to even accept the concept of cause and effect, one has to accept the concept of time and linearity and beginnings and ends. And in other dialogues, he's going to completely demolish all of those kind of dualities one by one, over the course of, all of these dialogues. So again, he's very gently, he's bringing up all the ordinary ways that we try to conceptualize and, quote, wrap our minds around reality or truth. And step by step, he's going to show you that you can't wrap your mind around reality, because reality is wrapped around your mind. But this is deep Plato now.
And I love the way you said that you can't wrap reality around your mind because your mind is wrapped around reality. It's one is chasing the other. Well said.
The other way around.
Yeah.
I think you said it the wrong way.
I wrote it the wrong way. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
You're right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you. And this idea of time consisting of beginnings and ends, but in the sequence, right? So there's cause and effect.
Linear. Right.
There's cause and effect. And actually, in Critias, he brings into the idea, like, is time actually circular or cyclic? So it may not be linear, but we experience time maybe as linear, from one cause to one effect, from the next cause to the next effect, like that. But it's certainly an interesting way of putting it. So
right. Phenomenally, we experience time linearly, but Roger Penrose is probably one of the most brilliant, living physicists, has come out just recently, kind of with his latest, really off the charts, theory, basically saying that the universe itself is constantly repeating. It's an eternal, coming into being and going out of being of the universe itself, in an infinite, a sort of regress, so to speak. And I think that, the cutting edge physicists with all of their latest thinking are coming closer and closer to, they're trying to wrap their mind around the infinity, the Christ consciousness, the universal consciousness. And, they're coming up to these limitations, what's generally referred to today as the hard question of consciousness. That the mind the mind, as we normally think of the mind as the brain, as this, very efficient computer, but as we're now learning, much, much more efficient, powerful computers than the brain can be, built. Yet consciousness is something that is not, it's of a different kind. And that's what, the hard question of consciousness is, that will the mind as brain ever be able to wrap itself around consciousness? And I think, personally, as an opinion that I've reached, is no. It's the only way. The only other way around is that consciousness envelops all minds.
Interesting idea, and certainly food for thought as we advance through Plato and we reflect even back on dialogues like Timaeus, where clearly the construction of the universe was the construction of a physical universe, but also the construction of an intelligent universe. And so you can't separate one from the other. And so certainly bringing Roger Penrose into that was interesting. So thank you for that, Ron. And we'll go to JK maybe for final comments, and then we're at the point where we have to wrap up.
Yeah, I guess the ultimate question is what is the cause, right? The cause is is either, he says it's either the pleasure or intelligence, or structure or feeling, and maybe it's a combination of both. And there's also the element of indeterminism, right? The chance, the element of randomness that might play a role there too. And it is a kind of perhaps a eternal recurrence of the same or the difference, right? Maybe a multiplicity of the same and difference, perhaps. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question. Yeah.
No, and a good thought, I think, to conclude on. What is the cause of everything? And where does reason reside in that? And how do we continually deal with that multiplicity of the same and different, as you called it? I think that's something that's I hope we can arrive at some conclusions on that this season. Especially maybe when we get to Parmenides, which is, I think there's some important things that are embedded in that dialogue. And so we'll look at Parmenides, I think, in about a month. But I think that's, good introduction to the Phaedo, which I think we'll spend our next 2 sessions on. So I'll post the part where we'll stop at in 2 weeks, and then we'll do the rest of it the following session. And the Phaedo certainly is all about the soul. And I think, that is the seat of intelligence and something that we need to bring into this whole construct. I think the physical universe is becoming very well understood. But, we've talked a lot today about consciousness and the ability of conscious individuals to see patterns and to understand the same and the different, and to make sense of that, and to take the empirical data and apply a rational process to arrive at meaning from that, and then to use memory and recollection to continue that continuous meaning process of meaning to derive both pleasure and knowledge in life. So it's been a great discussion today. I've learned a lot, and there's been some very interesting combinations of words and phrases that have made me think. So I wanted to thank everybody for participating today. Great to have some new people on board here today as well, and we hope to see you back again. So we will resume in 2 weeks. We will look at the Phaedo, and so we'll end the recording now. And those who want are welcome to stay online for an unrecorded session in which we will just have a casual discussion, and look forward to seeing everybody again for a recorded session in 2 weeks. So thank you very much.